Right, well, good whatever it is in your time zone, everyone. I hope some colleagues in the US are still catching a good night's sleep. My name is Niels Gaul, and just like our fantastic host Petros, I'm based at the University of Edinburgh, so please allow me to join Petros in welcoming you all very warmly to virtual Edinburgh, and especially to our second session this morning. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Óscar Prieto Domínguez, who will be no stranger to anyone working on literature written in Greek during the late Antique and Middle Byzantine periods. Dr. Prieto Domínguez is a lecturer in Greek language and literature at the University of Salamanca, where his first book, De Alieno Nostrum, El Canton Profano en el Mundo Grego, appeared in 2010 with the Ediciones Universidad de Salamanca. He has since published an edition of the poetess Cassia's surviving verses, prefaced with a detailed introduction and faced with a Spanish translation. 2019, there's some crossover with the book under review today. And last but not least, edited together with Jesus Hernandez Lobato, a major volume entitled Literature Squared, Self-Reflexivity in Late Antique Literature, that appeared with Brepols last year. I must confess I've mostly known Dr. Prieto Domínguez as the author of seminal articles on Middle Byzantine literary culture, such as on the founder of the Scripture Church, or especially the equally seminal Deconstructing Photius, both published in 2013, that I've profited from for years. At this point, let me try to share my screen. No, it's not to be working. Can you see anything?
No. Now, yes.
The whole screen?
Yeah.
That's not the idea. I just wanted to get the, wanted to get the book to you. So then we proceed with art. Among Óscar's impressive oeuvre, the opus magnum we are about to learn about more today, Literary Circles in Byzantine Iconoclasm, Patrons, Politics, and Saints, takes pride of place, no doubt, at a proud 542 pages, amounts to the most comprehensive coverage of the iconoclast repercussions on Byzantine literary life, mostly through the iconophile perspective. And since performative rhetoric was such a powerful tool, it goes without saying that these repercussions run deep into 9th century Byzantine culture and politics. I must confess that I find the title the tiniest bit misleading, as I was expecting, just judging by the title, a close analysis of the years of iconoclasm, while the book literally covers milieu or networks that span the whole 9th century, and especially the years following the so-called triumph of orthodoxy. Since I can't show you the table of contents, I'll talk you through it. Dr. Prieto Domínguez takes us on a commendably detailed journey from the Studite circle in the iconophile intermission and the early second iconoclast period through the circles around the patriarchs Methodius, Ignatius, and Photius, with equally detailed observations on the networks around and behind the Decapolitus family and at the imperial court, especially under and after that last iconoclast, Theophilus, and never loses sight of figures that cross circles or milieu, such as the hagiographer Sabas or indeed Ignatius the deacon. I was initially puzzled what the coverage certainly achieves at long last is to relegate the date of 843 to the background, a date that's been completely blown out of proportion in suggesting that things really changed from one day to the other. And I think that's one major achievement to mention up front. Since obviously what we know with hindsight could not have the same significance for those who were involved in the efforts to erase iconoclast discourse and involved or achieved that with considerable success as far as medieval discourse regulation goes. But this is only one of the key questions of Óscar's book, and actually you seem to be wavering a bit or what exactly happened to iconoclast discourse. Was it prohibited, destroyed, or simply fell into oblivion? Perhaps you'll say a bit more about that in a moment. But there is much more to admire in the book. What impresses above all is the rigorous attention to the manuscript evidence that I think has also become in recent years clear to be the foundation stone without which no attempt at writing Byzantine literary history can be undertaken. Who copied manuscripts? What texts were grouped together in what order? All these questions inform your analyses and make them so much richer and deeper. And of course, also your very deep and comprehensive knowledge of 9th century Byzantine history, iconoclast history, generally that allows you to literally contextualize dozens of texts very carefully in their context in a book that achieves near encyclopedic coverage of iconophile literary production in the 9th century. So with all this, I shall hand over to Óscar to tell us more about his exciting project. Please do keep your microphones muted, and while Óscar is talking or afterwards, please do post your questions into the Q&A or the chat boxes whenever you are ready. Óscar, over to you.
Okay, thank you for this introduction, Niels. Well, the Byzantine iconoclast period, that is between 726 and 843, has rightly drawn much attention, and in the last decades, important books have been published on its material history. However, its literature, the plethora of contemporary texts produced in this very period, dealing with the controversy and their transmission and reception, has not been subject to systematic study until now. This monograph provides not only a first comprehensive research of the extant texts which constitute the literature of iconoclasm, but also an analysis of their social, political, and identity impact. In short, it is a pioneering study of the literature nature. By examining the literary works on iconoclasm written both during the time of persecution and during the first generation after the restoration of icons in the year 843, this volume cast a new light on the striking reconstruction of Byzantine society, whose iconophile identity was vastly redefined by the different parties involved in the affair. These political parties in favor of the images built around charismatic and sometimes conflicting leaders, such as Theodoros Studites, Gregorius the Capolites, Empress Theodora, or the patriarchs Methodius, Ignatius, and finally Photius, use literature about icons to get their well-defined objectives. For this reason, the literature of this period can only be properly understood if studied in connection with the political milieu and the literary networks aiming to promote a series of biased narratives of the iconoclast controversy in order to favor their own agendas. A whole chapter is devoted to each of these milieu, whose members wrote literature as a response to their particular needs and interests, as shown by the promotion of the sanctity and cult of their own heroes, men and women who publicly defended icons and suffered for their faith. As a final methodological comment, the identification of the various literary circles and the assignment of individuals to each corresponds not simply to historical research, but to the literary products that have come down to us. Manuscripts are also literary products. The written production of an individual author marks him as belonging to one or more groups. This assignment is confirmed or qualified by the historical situation and other surviving evidence. Along with the designation literary circles, I speak of milieu, since I do not concentrate so much on networks and the relationships and on what lies behind them, the reasons they were forged, the way this was done, and the text they produced. The term milieu is conceptually less strict and broader than network, considering that it refers to the cultural setting of the members of a network and to the setting for the composition of their written works. In addition, equal importance is given to phenomena such as the type of performance, publication, distribution, reading, listening, intertextuality, imitatio and emulatio, etc. This rubric also allows greater flexibility to reflect the fluidity of interpersonal relationships, e.g., between the patron and the writer, whose collaboration is accentuated by ideological proximity, and the influence exercised upon both of them by the social political context. Patronage was certainly a key element in these structures, both for the protection it gave some readers and for the commissioning of written works that have come down to us. Although some patrons were laymen, high-ranking aristocrats linked to the court, most have professed a religious life, which meant that they chose ecclesiastical writers to draft the texts they commissioned. Throughout the whole iconoclast period, and even in succeeding decades, practically all the writers we know of are either monks or laymen who retreated to monasteries to write. The great service authors could render to their patrons' causes allowed them to achieve considerable social and geographical mobility. Although many are anonymous, they were determinant in the cultural life of the period, and it is therefore worth describing their status. To illustrate their freedom of movement and the rewards opened them for their literary work, the final chapter of my book, number 7, includes, by way of example, a case study tracing the socio-ecclesiastical career of one such author named Savas, an important hagiographer whose biography has not been previously received systematic scholarly treatment. The grouping of texts according to the milieu of production and reception not only reveals and makes sense of their interrelationship, it also yields valuable insights into the dynamics of composition and an important corollary of metaphrasis, rewriting. The book is a major advance in the study both of the construction of sainthood in Byzantium and of the development of hagiographical metaphrasis. The original of its conclusions is highlighted by Appendix B. Let me show it. Okay, here you have Appendix B, a network chart of all the writers discussed and their literary relations to illustrate the analytical framework of the study and to show the dynamics of interaction between authors, patrons, and political leaders, and even protagonists of the very texts. This voluminous monograph has been conceived to be original, monumental, and forensic. It is original in two ways. Firstly, in being the first study devoted to the copious literature, mainly apologetic and hagiographical, that was produced in opposition to or in retrospective condemnation of the political and ecclesiastical regime of the second iconoclasm. And secondly, it is original in grouping the text that it examines not according to literary genre, stylistic level, or even authorship, but to the milieu of common interest shared by protagonists, authors, patrons, and other intended readers. The work is monumental in its comprehensive and detailed coverage of copious source materials and secondary literature. It has been conceived also as a work of reference as well as a work of interpretation and analysis. Finally, this book is forensic in the sense that it systematically set out to expound the context, motivation, and intertextual and interpersonal connections of every literary work discussed. So, finally, a literary circus in Byzantine iconoclasm, patrons, politics, and saints combines rich descriptions of the author's motivation and the reception of their text with in-depth analysis of a number of selected works, providing both a general overview and a detailed study. I hope that this monograph will be not only an important synthesis of previous scholarship on this issue with updated data and a new point of view, that of sociology of literature, but also an important contribution in itself that offers a new paradigm for approaching Byzantine literature and understanding Byzantine literary constructions. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for hearing me today, and a special thanks to Cambridge University Press and to its commission editor for publishing my book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Óscar, for this